Hajime, welcome back to Comic-Jutsu. I'm JT McRoberts, your host, and today we're going to ask the question, just how many fighting styles did Deathstroke the Terminator really know? You know, in looking at the original book and in the source books released for that post-publication of this new Teen Titans #2, such as Who's Who and the various DC role-playing games, it's almost impossible to actually pin that down. There are a multiplicity, countless numbers of fighting styles out there in the world. And in Who's Who, I believe it says he's a master of all of them, in addition to being trained in military tactics and weaponry and all of these other sorts of martial approaches. But we're going to take a special look at issue #2. Here you can see I have the Dollar Comics reprint because it is prohibitively expensive to buy this on the secondary market. The new Teen Titans #2. Now this says #1 here on this reprint, which is totally confusing for people that want to collect and pay attention to their history. But here we see a nice cover by George Pérez with looks like his own inks on there. I don't see any other names. And you've got this big dramatic scene of the Ravager having defeated all of the Teen Titans, our superheroes, our titular superheroes, and in the background, the foreboding silhouetted figure of Deathstroke the Terminator. So this is interesting because this uses several of Carmine Infantino's cover sequences that will always sell, such as showing the hero in peril or defeated and having the cover talk to you. So here they're talking directly to the reader. I don't know how well it worked. So it's worth noting this is not a pure facsimile edition. It's not a recreation because they didn't have an ad for the Titans show on HBO Max way back in 1980. But I'm okay with that. You know, at least we get to have this single issue without having to pick it up inside a graphic novel or something to that effect. Now, also I want to make note that this was released street date September 11th, 1980. So at the time, it would have been competing with John Byrne's X-Men. Here I have the X-Men Classic reprint, but it is the Sasquatch issue, not Sasquatch, but the Wendigo issue that would have been on the stands at this time. And I say that's worth pointing out because to me, the new Teen Titans just always felt like DC's attempt to answer the success of what was going on with the Uncanny X-Men at the time. The very next month would see the launch into Days of Future Past, you know, their most classic X-Men storyline of all time. Nice cover by Jackson Butch Geist there. Finishes by Scott Williams. Steve Lytle cover there on X-Men Classic. But for those reasons alone are among the reasons, well, I should say, as to why I didn't pick this up at the time. I mean, it just seemed like a pale imitation of X-Men. Though I was always fascinated by the figure of the Terminator, aka Deathstroke. So here we see, this is almost classic Jim Shooter storyline. Every comic is somebody's first comic. You know, you have to introduce the background and at least the powers as soon as possible. So here we have this great setup. You know, all the figures are hooded, so a lot of mystery created. I used to love when they had the character rundowns on the side there. And we see a back view of the Terminator. And then here, across 2 pages, across this spread, we get to see all of his powers at play, all of his weaponry. So one of the reasons I wanted to focus on this and the character of Deathstroke, especially here at his creation, is because it introduces the concept not only of weaponry but also of strategy. Now, mind you, we aren't going to see any quotes from Sun Tzu and the Art of War or the Book of Five Rings from Musashi or anything like that in here, and I'm sure those concepts and ideas and works were as far as possible from the minds of George Pérez and Marv Wolfman when they created this book. But they were smart enough to at least say, hey, we need a character. We need this merc type character who's kind of superpowered, but not really. And how's he going to be able to go up against all of the force of the combined might of the new Teen Titans? Well, obviously he would have to have some decent weapons, and he'll have to use a bit of strategy from time to time. So, they kind of backwards reverse engineered their way into it. So the first thing we notice is this nice sword that he's carrying. So he's got weaponry, because no one wants to use hand-to-hand combat against, spellcasters, energy blasters, super powered, super strong Amazon, expert martial artist, acrobat, guy that can turn into any kind of animal. Any one of these is more than a match for a simple martial artist. Cyborg, cybernetically enhanced. And then a super speedster down here with Kid Flash, who eventually becomes the Flash, mind you. So right away, we see his reflexes, dodging machine guns, not easy to do. Uses a nice grenade here to soften them up. Anybody will tell you in the world of video games or RPGs, you use a good grenade to soften them up. Dives at them, grabs his sword right away, finds out they were just holograms. So another thing is worth noting, that even though this is the answer to 1980s X-Men, it's also just firmly embedded in the paradigm of the day. I mean, you see all these nutty sci-fi tropes at full play. So they have like a little thread of what I call the Denny O'Neil seriousness that branched out from like the Green Arrow, Green Lantern stuff, where they took on overpopulation and heroin and all that, because you'll see that little thread winding through to like try to make it mature, in addition to the other things that they do. But it's also, it's still kind of taking that science fiction like approach of, yes, these are aliens, these are cyborgs, these are people in strange costumes that are interacting like real people in their day-to-day lives. So here at the bottom of page 2, I mean, there's some heavy storytelling going on here. I'd like to know, if these were heavily scripted in advance, or if Wolfman and Pérez sat down together and they said, okay, well, by the end of page 2, we need to go ahead and introduce Grant, and so on and so forth. But anyway, I'm not going to labor over the actual story too much. We're mainly talking about the fighting aspects of Deathstroke. But, in that they were trying to make a kind of a mature, almost realistic approach, they came up with a really fun character, even if he has the most outlandish outfit, but it's survived to today. It's translated well to the screen. George Pérez has that nice designer's eye where he can come up with some really gorgeous costumes, and he kind of presaged the modern trope of layering it with armor. It's chainmail. He's got all the Image pouches, long before Image. But anyway, and then you see him bash down this door, which looks like a metal door. I mean, he just bends it right in half. So he's like Captain America level, but a little bit higher. And then they have this whole background that they're weaving in. So you have this super merc. He refuses the job, but then he kind of winds up taking it anyway. And we have all these character elements just shoved into this to try to make it serious. Here we have the Denny O'Neil, let's get serious moment, where you have a guy committing spousal abuse, or girlfriend abuse, what have you, here on his significant other. And the girls of the Teen Titans take exception to that, and they attack him, blow up his apartment. He runs away, vowing revenge. So the writing, Marv Wolfman was never a favorite of mine, though I will admit they do eventually get into stride, and they kind of bring some of the camp levels down, and they bring some of the other more mature elements up, and it meets kind of a happy middle ground. There was a point where I started buying Teen Titans, and I really enjoyed it. You know, I think it helped once they got rid of the goofy Robin costume. It was just the garishness of some of the costumes was just too much for me. I know that seems strange after admitting that, Marvel's X-Men was one of my primary buys every single month. And they had their own share of crazy costumes, but you know what? They also took a lot of time to just take those guys out of costume and have them interact with things or accidentally bump into villains or aliens, and they had to deal with them when they were not in costume. Now, mind you, superhero comics, they should use their costumes and embrace these mythic origins, but you always have to find a balance, and that story has to be presented at a moment in time, so it just depends on where the audience is and where the creators are trying to present their book, at what level they're trying to present it. So here we have another aspect of strategy where he actually does a little bit of scouting. And it's worth noting he's got a wintergreen. Here we have the man in the chair, the guy that he calls, says he needs some things to be done. This presages all the other men in the chairs, so to speak. Oracle basically became this character, Batgirl / Oracle. The Punisher had several men in the chair, that sort of thing. And of course we saw that whole trope get played up and given lip service and lampshaded in the Spider-Man movies, No Way Home, Far From Home, Homecoming, all of those. So he doesn't just rush out and start trying to attack these guys. They set up that he's watching them. Nice graphic design sensibility here from George Pérez. See a lot of things at play. You've got this abstract looking through the scope, but then it keys in right to this, and Deathstroke's presented in silhouette against a black sky. Very nice. And he's scouting. He's gathering information. He doesn't just run straight in and start doing this. Now, here's another obvious X-Men influence, because to me, Raven just always felt like a Phoenix XP. It was just their analog for the Phoenix. And the X-Men did their fair share of ripping off from Teen Titans as well, because, of course, the great Deadpool character was a straight ripoff of Deathstroke the Terminator. Funny how that works out sometimes. Here Gar is living in, I guess this is the Doom Patrol mansion at the time, because he was adopted by Niles Calder, the professor of the Doom Patrol. So yeah, so they just try to make all this stuff like uber serious, and here they all but scream, this is for mature readers, but they're just skirting that line. They've put a boob joke in right here at the bottom of the page. And, as a kid, you probably move right past it, but as an adult, you kind of linger and you go, yeah, maybe so. So it's interesting. It's interesting seeing where the comic boogaloo has to end, How is it presented to the audience of its time, and how does it stand up to, over time, how does it stand up to more sophisticated audiences as they come along? And the fun thing about some of these early DC and Marvel books is that they create a lot of the tropes that people now take for granted. So I always like to look back and try to appreciate each work in the times in which it was presented. So here, Ravager attacks. This is another part of strategy, because again, Deathstroke doesn't attack the Teen Titans directly, because here you can see Ravager just gets wiped out. One move from Cyborg. But Deathstroke takes advantage, uses what he calls a power dampener, but it's effectively a super taser to tase Cyborg, momentarily take him out of action. And here you see the combination of George Pérez and Romeo Tanghal using that strange cross-hatching to create a background for no particular reason. And that's something that we'd see used to great effects in the works of Art Adams and, of course, the Image guys later on down the road. Little nod to George Pérez's love of Greek and Roman mythology. There we see a little architecture there at the poolside. But again, this is all, you would see this in the X-Men a lot, where they were just lounging around, swimming, having a good time. But it was a little hard to identify with these guys, because they had the billionaire aspect of like the Bruce Wayne thing thrown right on them, where they could just kind of hang out and drink and be lazy by the pool all day, and then wait to get a call on their little superhero radio and then go check it out. So here, Deathstroke retreats. He tries to warn Ravager that his powers are going to end up killing him if he doesn't stop using them. So that's the subplot. So they set up a whole lot of drama in this, and this is just part of the paradigm of the time where every single panel just had to be layered with dialogue and dialogue and dialogue and explanations to try to hammer it all home. And the X-Men was no stranger to this as well. Here on the first page, you have this great splash page of Colossus ripping up the stump, but it's just plastered down with words from Claremont. And this whole thing is interesting. I haven't mentioned the Hive yet, but it's one of the many influences at play here, and this makes me think straight up of the Punisher, not the Punisher, but of the the Prisoner TV series. You know, they had everyone had a number, and number 6, the lead character, was always trying to find out who number 1 was because supposedly he was behind everything, but number 2 was the only one they could ever find. He was always kind of presented as the big bad evil guy, but there was the assumption that there was a number 1 behind it all. But anyway, so you see a little bit of the Prisoner influence here mixed in with all this X-Men action, filtered through the lens of the new Teen Titans, courtesy of George Pérez and Romeo Tanghal. And I will say, you know, I'm not overly enamored of Tanghal's inking on Pérez in this, but they do eventually hit their stride, and their work is just phenomenal down the stretch. So in these early days, it looks like Tanghal was a little bit light on his lines, and later on when he kind of embraces the lines of George Pérez, it really brings the fullness out of the entire books and the stories and the art. Here we have Deathstroke using his weaponry, trying to keep range. It's one reason I wanted to talk about this, because it's not just simple boxing or judo move or jiu-jitsu move, but you know, he's using a little bit of the strategy of sending in the dogs. He's letting this Ravager guy attack them first, draw a lot of their attacks, and then he's coming in behind them and starting to do a little bit of the cleanup. And here we see the battle staff represented for the first time, although I do believe historically that the first battle staff was actually Evel Knievel's staff, and it was actually called a swagger staff that was released with the Evel Knievel action figure. So a little bit of trivia for you there. So if you want to use a battle staff, call it a swagger staff. Same thing. But anyway, introducing the concept of weaponry. Kid Flash is fast, but he's too fast for him, but not if he uses a little bit of intelligence with his weapons, trips him up. And then here Ravager just starts dying because of his powers are getting to him. But, you know, it's all part of the plot. This is all packed into just one single issue. You know, we introduce this dude, we get him superpowers, and then by the end of the issue, he is dying. And also, it serves as this brilliant introduction for Deathstroke, but attempts to give him some sympathy. I mean, they knew from early on that they wanted this guy to stick around. They wanted him to be a bit of a gray character, not just a straight up bad, black-hearted evil villain that you'd want to see wiped out one issue, but one that they wanted to create more questions in the readers' minds as time went on. So he ages himself to death. This is like that movie. Was it with Gregory Peck? It was in the late 70s, early 80s. Was it called Lifeform? It was something like that, where he creates artificial life, and it creates this young child who grows into a woman who then ages rapidly and dies. So little shades of that, but maybe I'm reading too much into it, but you never know. When these guys are making monthly books, they just look at the landscape of pop culture and they just grab little bits and bobs from here and there and throw it all in the stew and see what comes up. Here you have your little emotional resolution, and we have the continuing watch of the Hive here, numbers 1 through 5, and then presenting Slade Wilson as a human. Here he is without his mask, showing some remorse. He's got his man in the chair with him, reveals that Ravager was his son, like father, like son. So they're setting up this whole melodramatic subplot, which, mind you, in some ways it's heavy-handed, it's boring, but it helps flesh the character out, and it gives him legs and keeps him going. So he makes it all the way to the era of the superhero in which we live now, where it permeates the media landscape, whether it's the silver screen, the streaming screen, or the big screen. So there you have it. How many styles does Deathstroke the Terminator know? Who knows? According to Who's Who, he knows all of them. But here in this first appearance, we saw a good mix of weaponry, strategy, sticking to proper ranges to his advantage. So lots of good stuff all the way through. Great debut for a classic character. And yeah, we enjoyed talking about it with you. And look for more breakdowns of Deathstroke the Terminator in the future. He'll be back for more, as will we. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'm working on my graphic novel. When it's ready, there will be links for you to check it out. Please support it. Find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of those places. And we'll see you next time. Mate!